Alrighty, hello everyone. Welcome back to Ableton Tutorials with the Q-Wave. My name is Tiago, and today we are going to be talking about more of a continuation on mixing and a little bit of automation and what that is and how to do it. So, first thing that I want to talk about is a very useful tool that Ableton has, and that's called the Simpler. So, the Simpler here, I've got it in this channel. The Simpler is basically just a sampling tool. So you basically add a certain audio that you want to the Simpler, and it will turn it into something that you can like play with, maneuver, edit, change the pitch, etc. So it's just a sampler basically, which is kind of close to the name. But yeah, so let's get right into that. And to start, I'd just like to highlight that there are 3 modes on the Simpler. Oh, also you can find the Simpler in your instruments, and it's right there. So, Simpler. So basically, like I said earlier, you can use it to turn an audio file into a playable note. So if I select record this channel, and let me just go into samples here, and I found this random vocal sample here, and if I drag it and drop it right into the Simpler, then I now have access to playing this note. Oh, right. Yeah, so it basically takes this audio and it makes it playable. Yeah, it's as simple as that. Anyways, yeah, so I've just got my MIDI keyboard connected here on the side. But similar to before, if you press M on your keyboard, you can actually just play it on your computer keyboard too. So you don't necessarily need a MIDI, but I do like my MIDI keyboards. Yeah, anyways. So if you look down here, we have controls for the frequencies, for your filter, an LFO, which is a low frequency oscillator, and you have on this side your envelope ADSR, which ADSR stands for attack, decay, sustain, release, which is just the things that are listed there. But yeah, so you have access to all of these things, and you can adjust, let's say, the frequency. Turns it into like more of a cutoff. Yeah. LFO, you can change the oscillator that's in the background of it. Right now it's just set to a simple sine wave, which I'm going to leave it at for now. And let's say we want it to be more, we can adjust all of these as well, including the volume. And yeah, so that's the first part of the Simpler. But I would also like to demonstrate for those who prefer having a visual for it, is up here in the top right. If you look at the controls and you click the controls tab, you actually get the visual for the filter, for the LFO tool, and for the envelope ADSR, which instead of just adjusting the knobs, you can actually adjust now just manually. So let's say I want to adjust this. There's a very subtle change, but yeah. If you look in the ADSR section, this is one that's like not noticeable on the other page, but we have these other things that you could adjust here, including this spread. So if we turn this up, it basically increases the stereo range of it, so you'll be hearing it a little more on your left and right. So increase it all the way. As opposed to at 0% if I got it all the way back down. Yeah. So once again, these pages both do very similar things, but this is more of a visual thing. Now if you click loop here, assuming you're holding down the note, it'll just keep looping. And you can also adjust the end here to kind of cut it off and make the sound shorter. Yeah, so just a cool little thing. Now, let's say I reset the simpler back to just the vocals. If I lower the octave, you can almost get like a bass sounding sound. Yeah. So that's the classic mode of the simpler. Now there are some other modes. The second one here is called the one shot. So if I press a note, that's just me pressing, not holding down on the keyboard. It plays it as a one shot, so it plays it all the way through, which this mode is useful for like percussion, like drums, or just making like little plucks. So now in this mode, you can't actually play chords. You have to just play one shot of one pitch. So when you're wanting to do the one shot, you'll obviously want to adjust this because you don't want to necessarily play a full 2 seconds of audio as a one shot. You'd probably want to adjust it to be shorter. What you can do here, and similar to the previous mode of your simpler, you can also adjust the frequency, the low LFO, and your ADSR. Yeah, but also one thing that's slightly different here is you can also introduce a fade out. So that makes it more bass-y, I guess. So that's a cool little trick that you can do. So that about sums up the second of 3 like modes in the simpler. And once again, you'd want to use the one shot more for a pluck or for a drum. Yeah, pluck or a drum, and that's mostly about it. But yeah, now what we're going to take a look at is the third mode, which is called slice. And this is what it's most commonly used for. So, or what simpler is most commonly used for. So what we're going to do first is I'm actually going to delete this, and I'm going to add the simpler back. And I'm going to take this downloaded file that I took from Splice earlier and put in, and go back to Slice. So when I put this sample in, now it automatically splits it up into different segments. So I can go to my keyboard and just start playing randomly. So yeah, that is how it automatically does that for you basically, but you can basically just play around with that. And that's what people like to do, is they take that, they find sounds that they like from it, and then they play it and re-record it and resample that as a melody. So now what else can you do with this? So as I said earlier, this is more useful if you're using larger, typically vocal samples, because there's more to work with. And what you can do is, if you find where it says sensitivity here, if you turn that down, it'll start changing up where all the slices are happening. Yeah, so you can get some cool chopped up vocals with that. It's a tool that I definitely would like to start using a bit more in my current production, but it's honestly pretty sick. So yeah, that is all of the simpler techniques that I will be demonstrating today. And similar to the other ones, you have access to your filters, your LFOs, and your ADSR via the controls tab up here. Yeah, so that's all I wanted to talk about for the simpler tool. And now I'm going to get into more of the other audio effects that are useful for mixing. Actually, I'm going to talk about all of the audio effects today. Just going to go over every single one very briefly. So I have made just some basic little chords here. That's quite loud, actually. I made some simple chords here in Serum, not Serum, Surge. And for the purpose of this, I think I'm gonna just loop it. But yeah, so I'm gonna expand this tab a little bit, zoom in here. So we've got your surge in your audio effects rack, but we're gonna have a look at all of these audio effects here, starting with the delay and loop category. So I'm going to go into here and click on the beat repeat. So what does beat repeat do? Well, it's kind of self-explanatory, but so that's a neat little tool if you're wanting to create some like glitchy effects. Now with the delay, so the delay, the echo, the filter delay, and the grain delay, which is the next four, they're all basically just delays, which are, it kind of creates like a little echo effect after the sample. So as you can see, after that, it faded out and there was like a little bit of an effect. You can change it to a fade, to a jump, to a ping pong effect. And you can adjust where you want the, like to what degree and to like which parts of the frequency you want to be impacted by the delay. So let's say you want to ping pong the upper end at like a slightly less, we're going to lower the, to make it a bit more dry. So it'll be like a subtle upper bouncy effect afterwards. So that's delay. And in a similar vein, your echo is just the same thing, but it comes with modulation and a reverb, like built in. Yeah, similar thing. It's kind of cool. Filter delay here is slightly different from regular delay, but it has the same premise. Filter delay basically lets you to target multiple parameters, including your lows, your like your left and right, your mids, and your right channels. So it targets multiple channels of audio. So you can get some very particular, specific delays happening there. And now, lastly, grain delay. This is an interesting one here. So it basically reduces your audio to something called grains, and where you position your little cursor here on the grid will impact which grains are being highlighted. So you get some strange sounding, I'll show you what I mean. So you can get some pretty cool sounds with it, but it's a difficult one to sort of contain sometimes. Next up, we have looper. So looper, basically, you will record audio and it plays it back infinitely afterwards, which I'm not going to demonstrate today because you probably won't be using this too much, but it just loops your audio basically. And lastly, spectral time here will create like a spectral sort of waveform, which can kind of create like pads and like wacky. Okay. Yeah, so you get some cool kind of pad sounds that kind of last a long time, but it's a cool effect. And that's it for your delays and loops. Now, if we take a look at the next category, that's your drive and your color. And to start with your amp and your cabinet, for example, these two are both examples of it kind of has the effect that an old school classic like guitar amp would, and it kind of replicates that. And the amp versus the um, cabinet do it kind of differently, but you can adjust. You can kind of adjust to what amp you want, and it actually recreates that effect. So they're both pretty cool. They go hand in hand, but I'd recommend it if you're trying to create a guitar-like sound, or if you're just trying to modify your actual guitar recording. Um, so yeah, that's what those do. Next up, we've got the drum bus. This is a pretty complex tool, and it honestly deserves its own like tutorial. But it's kind of a 3-in-1. It obviously is used for drums, but it's a saturator, a limiter, and a bass enhancer. So you can use it. You can increase the drive, the crunchiness of the audio. You can dampen it with the filter. Adjust the transients, etc. But yeah, once again, not necessarily for synth chords, but it's a cool thing to use. I definitely recommend looking more into it. Next up here, I'm not going to talk about the dynamic tube because I honestly don't really know what it is, but I guess I can try. I think it's just it sounds like some sort of saturator that causes like an overdrive effect, but yeah. So these next couple, the erosion, overdrive, pedal, and the saturator are all saturators, I guess the dynamic tube including. And saturators are basically wave shapers. So they change the actual waveform of your audio, and it can make it louder, so sometimes you got to adjust in the like gain on the side. So let's have a look at the erosion first. So with erosion, you can either use sine waves or noise to adjust or like introduce more harmonics into your audio. That's what that would sound like. Now your overdrive is just a saturator with a filter that it's pretty self-explanatory. It will make your music, it gives it more grit, more energy. I'm a big fan of this one personally. I use that one quite a bit. Next up, we've got the pedal. If I can click on it. So your pedal is, once again, it kind of emulates sort of like a guitar distortion pedal. Once again, more for guitar like samples, but it gives it a cool effect to anything you kind of put it to. So I'm going to talk about the saturator next. I'll be coming back to the Redux. Saturator is kind of the general theme of like all of these, and you can increase the drive. Oh, that was a little too much. You can turn on the soft clipping, increase frequency. It's just a wave shaper basically. Next up, I would like to talk about the vinyl distortion, which I'm not a huge fan of this one. It basically just gives the vinyl feel to what you're playing. adds a little crackle, which you can turn down, but if you're looking for that sort of effect, I would recommend it. And lastly, for the driving color, obviously we got the Redux, which is, this one's super cool. So it's basically a bit crusher, which reduces the bit quality of your audio and makes video gamey sounds. Let's say I reduce the rate and the bits, and up the jitter. Yeah, it's again a little extreme for an example, but that one's super cool if you're wanting like the video gamey sounds. And yeah, that is it for the driving color. Next up, we've got your dynamics, which to start with your compressor. Now this is a very important tool. So your compressor is basically, or like the purpose of the compressor is to reduce the dynamic range of a sound. So it's used to adjust the volume of the track, and you can use it to, if certain parts of like an audio sample, for example, are louder than the other parts, it kind of levels out the audio to your, like, I guess I've chosen a poor example by picking a saw wave for this, but you can drag this line down. So that's mostly what that's for. And like I showed in the previous tutorial, you can use a side chain and take input from a different track, which we talked about in the previous tutorial. Next up, we have the glue compressor, or we have the gate actually. So the gate, similar to the other one, you can use it to reduce like specific parts of your sound. So it's just another compressor. Now a glue compressor is very similar to the compressor once again, but it kind of emulates, or it's supposed to emulate, a classic compressor. You can turn down the threshold and increase the makeup and adjust the attack release ratios, etc. Yeah, so that is your glue compressor. Next up here, I have the limiter, which is mostly used in the mastering chain, but it basically creates what we like to call a digital ceiling, which is used to increase the gain to match lower, or increase the gain of a lower sound level. So it kind of does the reverse of a compressor, or it can be also used to do a compressor, and you do that by lowering the ceiling to a certain decibel level, and then you can increase the gain to match that. So yeah, it's typically used in mastering chains. And lastly, for the dynamics channel, we have the multiband dynamics. And this is basically a compressor, but in each of the levels. So we've got the high frequency, the mids, and the lows. You can adjust the input and the output. If you want to cut the mids out and the lows, and you want to focus on the highs, reverse it. So that's kind of what it's for. It's like a multi-level compressor. And that's it for the dynamics tab. So next up we have the EQ and the filters. And to start with, we have the auto filter, which is kind of just a simple, they're all simple equalizers or EQs. So this, you can set it to one specific pass filter. And you can adjust like a low pass or a high pass, or a mid. So that's the auto filter. The auto, your channel EQ here is used for less intricate EQ, where you can lower the lows, increase the mids, increase the highs. So it's basically just a channel. Well, yeah, it's in the name. It's a channel EQ, so it targets the mids, the highs, and the lows for individual equalizing. And as we talked about in the previous tutorial, we have your EQ8, where you can set each individual point to a specific filter. You can adjust the amplitude of that point via the Q. You can also increase it to get a bigger visual up here to see, and that can be used to your discretion. And similar, if you don't have access to the suite versions, the EQ3 does the same thing, which we talked about in the previous tutorial. And that'll be it for your EQs and your filters. And next up, we have modulators, which I don't know if I'm gonna talk about that actually, because these technically, they're more in depth. Maybe I'll do a tutorial on those. But now if I go into the pitch and modulation, if I have a look at the auto pan here, your auto pan will move your audio from left to right. You can increase the amount. So let's do 100% just for increase the rate. So that's a cool one if you're making a future-based sounding track. Next up, we have your chorus ensemble, which kind of gives the illusion that there's multiple tracks playing at once. The classic, the ensemble, or the wacky vibrato one as well. Next up, we have the phaser flanger, or phaser flanger, whatever you like to call it. I don't know how to pronounce it. You can get some cool spacey sounding noises with that one. That's a fun one. Next up, your shifter. Oops. This can adjust the fine tuning of you can basically just adjust the pitch or the fine tuning with the semitones and with the cents. If you want to go to like half a semitone up, for example, let's set that to 0. So that's what that one does. And that is it for your pitch and modulation. Now we're gonna look at your reverb and resonance, and to start with, we have corpus, which is it's a strange one. This one I've only discovered it recently, if it'll load. But this basically will emulate a percussive sound to give like very complex resonances. So it's like you're hitting like a metal sort of beam, and it kind of creates those weird resonances that you sometimes hear off of other objects. Your hybrid reverb, or let's start with regular reverb here. So your regular reverb is basically a it emulates the reflections in real life to give kind of an atmosphere. This one's pretty good for synths in particular. So it kind of gives that extra decay, that fall off. And if you look at your hybrid reverb, the hybrid reverb, this kind of it's more algorithmic. So it takes the audio, it takes the waveform and creates its own sort of reverb to it. See, this one is more useful if you're trying to add reverb to drums, as the main reverb doesn't have the same power, and it kind of makes it sound wet and like distorted and repitched. So next up we have your resonator, and the resonator, you can basically use it to add different levels of harmonics to your pitch. It's a strange one once again, but that's what that does. Your spectral resonator has a similar effect, but it creates harmonics by messing with the frequencies. That's an interesting one, to say the least. And your vocoder, which, if you've heard of Daft Punk, this is kind of what they like to do, what they like to use with their vocals. You can actually draw in how you want it to go. So you would use pitch tracking for vocals. That one you wouldn't typically use with synths, but that's what that does. So our last category here is the utilities. And to start, we're going to go right to the audio effect rack, which is basically, you can add like multiple audio effects into this one audio effect rack, and it'll give like a macro parameter to change like multiple effects at the same time, which I'm not going to demonstrate today because that's complicated. And next, I'm going to discuss the spectrum, which it shows, this is useful for like a master track. It'll show the specific frequencies of the track. So that's what that does. And your tuner here, this will show what the pitch is if you don't have a bunch going on at the same time to confuse it, because I have a bunch of different tones playing. And lastly, your utility. So the utility can basically increase or decrease the width of a track. You can adjust the panning and the output gain. So that's that. Those are basically all of the audio effects. And yeah, that's it for that. I'll check the chat quickly to see if there's any questions. Okay. So the last thing that I want to talk about today is automation. And I'm only going to briefly go over it just because of time's sake, but automation is it's basically a set of parameters and ways to adjust the audio effects or MIDI effects that are being applied to your instrument without actually manually changing them while recording. It's just a set of instructions for your DAW to follow, or digital audio workspace to follow, to make the audio modulations happen. So if you have your keyboard unselected, if you press A, you'll notice that the track goes dark and you see this red line here. And this is where you basically add your automations. So let's look at this track that I've been listening to for the past 40 minutes. I apologize. I could have come up with better chords, but yeah. So right now we have, if you look close here, we have your mixer and your speaker on. So we have two drop-down menus. If you click on the top one, we don't really have any audio effects in right now. So let's keep it simple. We're gonna add an EQ, and we're gonna make it a low pass, and I'm just gonna move it all the way up here for now. So we're gonna select your EQ8, and then under here, this does look like a lot, but these are all parameters for all of these points. So if we want to automate a low pass filter to increase or decrease, we're going to find the 4. We're going to take the frequency, which right now is set pretty high, and we're going to click on the line to create a point. And now from there, I can drag it all the way down. I can add another point, drag this down, another point, drag it up. You can kind of just click and adjust. And now if you play back, notice down here it's automatically taking care of it for me. Cool. One other thing that you can do is if you hold down your Alt key, or if you're on Mac, your Option key, you press it down and you click on a line, you can actually create you can turn that straight line into like a curved line to do more intricate sort of modulations. If you want it to be exponential or logarithmic, I guess is the technical term for that. But yeah. So lastly, the last thing that I want to talk about here is how to properly copy and paste an automation. So if you want to copy an automation, you're not going to want to click the entire track or try to highlight from the top of the track. What you need to do is actually just highlight this part. And now I can copy this and say I want it here. I can just, boom, paste. So yeah, that is basically how to automate. You can adjust multiple things at once. You can adjust multiple different things like the mixer or any audio effect you add. So let's say I want to adjust the panning. I can add a couple dots and bring that up, bring that down, bring that up a bit, bring that down. So now we have both the EQ parameter and automation going, as well as the mixer track panning automation. And you can add as many of these as you want, and it all works at the same time. So yeah, that is all that I have down for this tutorial. But if there are any questions quickly, I will pull up the chat and have a quick look. Well, it doesn't appear so. So that's all for this tutorial. This is actually the last Ableton tutorial before winter break. So um, I will see you guys all after winter break. And I think after winter break, I'm mostly going to go over I'm finally going to go into how to make specific genres and make specific types of, like, how to produce different genres basically. So yeah, that'll be it for this tutorial. Thank you guys for tuning in, and have a good rest of your day. Yeah, that's it. Bye guys.